Hello, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner, and welcome to tonight's edition of The Robust Opposition. I'm really excited to be doing my show after so many months of being dark, but I just, I've been so upset and obsessed with what's been going on in Israel, Palestine, that it's just all I can think about. And just to update people, we're now 3.5 months into this, and it's 25,000 people have been killed, over 52,000 have been wounded. Some people think the number of killed could even be 32,000 because of all the people buried under the rubble who are presumed dead. 85% of the people have been displaced. 70% of the homes have been bombed. And now there's very little food. Save the Children is saying that there could be 500,000 people who will die of starvation, far more than who've even died from the bombs. I can go on and on about how journalists have been killed, activists, human rights workers, doctors, artists, university presidents. I mean, you could call this at best collective punishment and at worst ethnic cleansing and genocide. But what's happening in this country, although not as bad as what's happening over there, obviously, is pretty bad too, because if anybody should step out to protest this, they're being targeted. People are losing their jobs, people are losing contracts, people are being doxxed. And on the case of college campuses where there's a tremendous amount of protesting, the situation has become pretty dire. So I'd like to bring in my guest, who is Leila Saliba. Welcome to the show, Leila.
Thank you so much for having me. This is so exciting. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to me.
Well, I'm taking the time to speak to you because I've been following you for months now, and all the travails that you've been going through at Columbia University. I would love for you to talk about that on tonight's show. But first, if you could please tell, first I want to tell the viewers that we will find out later in the show that Leila was skunked, is it term?
Yes, that's the term.
Friday, and she's still recovering from it. And this mask that she's wearing really helps with her symptoms. So that's the reason she's wearing the mask on my show tonight. So before we get into what's been going on at Columbia, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from? I know you grew up in North Carolina, went to college here. That's where I live right now. And also how you happen to have family from Palestine.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Leila Saliba. I'm from North Carolina, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm currently going to grad school right now in New York City. I'm studying social work at Columbia University. And so my focus is called policy practice. I'm really passionate about making healthcare more accessible and more affordable for people. That's why I wanted to go into grad school. And my family is Palestinian. So my mom is American and my dad is Palestinian. My family is from Ramallah, which is a big city in the West Bank. And these past few months, I, along with other students, we've been dealing with immense suppression, scrutiny, surveillance, just for organizing on campus and standing up for the humanitarian rights of the Palestinian people. And I think it's something when we talk about the college experience and talk about free speech on campus and stuff, I think it's a really important perspective to consider. So yeah, I'm really happy to be here.
Well, absolutely. And so, what was your first reaction when you found out what happened in Israel on October 7th of last year?
It was I was in shock, to be honest. I was in complete shock. I was attending my friend's wedding that day, and I just started getting frantic texts and calls from people, just like, "Oh my gosh, did you hear what's going on? Did you hear what's going on?" And a lot of my Jewish friends are reaching out to me. They were really worried as well. It was just overall just a stressful situation. It was just a stressful situation. And I also too, like, when this happened, I had a pit in my stomach because I knew that the Palestinian people were going to experience immense death and destruction because of the events of October 7th.
Now, what was your first experience protesting? Were you a participant? Were you an organizer? What was the content of the protest? And what was other students' reaction to it and the universities?
So I'm a community organizer. That's my background. And so I've had a history of protesting for years, but I would say protesting on campus specifically, the first one I joined was October 12th. And that was after a vigil that we had for Palestine. So the university actually decided to try and shut that down. Even though it was completely peaceful, we were falsely accused of promoting terrorism just for honoring the lives of our family members and our relatives that had died in Gaza. So it was just the way that the university responded to the events was very disappointing. Like, for example, I had to ask Columbia personally, like, hey, can we create support spaces for students of Arab descent or for students who are Palestinian? And like in the initial communications and stuff with the university, Columbia didn't even say the word Palestinian for months. And so it just felt very isolating. It felt as if our pain wasn't real, as if our pain wasn't if our pain didn't matter, because it's like you can't even say the word Palestinian. And that was a big reason why I started participating in the protests. And then what really I would say really increased my involvement was seeing the continued death and destruction, and then also being personally impacted as well. So I had 14 of my family members, they were killed in the Gaza church bombing. My family is Palestinian Christians. And so they were all in-laws and relatives on my dad's side. And like, even now, like, it's still hard to like talk about. It's still hard to talk about. Like, it's so surreal. And it's just part of why, a big reason why I started protesting too was just like, I'm in social work. And so it's like, I see people who experience marginalization and oppression in multiple forms. People who are low income, people who are struggling to afford healthcare, people who are incarcerated, etc. And it's like, to me, it was so frustrating. It's like, why are my tax dollars going towards killing my family members in Gaza? Like, why can't my tax dollars go towards like free housing or healthcare or so many other things that our money could be better spent on? And then what was also frustrating too was like just how the Biden administration has handled Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims, and Palestinians, and just kind of taken us for granted and just assumed that, oh, what was it? We'll vote for him. Like we'll turn out for Biden. And it's just been really frustrating. Like the day after I found out about my family, Biden went on national television and was doubting the death tolls. And it's just like, it's just cruel. It's cruel to do that to people who are suffering so much. And I think too, it's like, I think why so many people are protesting and why so many people are upset is because we are all seeing this in real time. We are seeing the genocide in Gaza on our phones every single day. It's so hard to ignore. Never in history has a genocide been so well documented like this one. Like Palestinians, they are speaking in English, which is not their first language, and showing us the most vulnerable moments of their lives in order for things to change. And it's like, how can you not bear witness to that? How can you not be moved by what is going on? And I think people too are just kind of seeing the hypocrisy in the government with how the government has responded to Palestine. For example, with Ukraine, we saw so much support from the government for Ukraine and stand up for Ukraine and fight for freedom and stuff. But then when Palestinians do it, it's seen as unacceptable. It's seen as terrorism. And so people are noticing the rhetoric and the language that is being used towards Palestinians, and they're upset. They're finding it hypocritical. And honestly, I don't blame them.
Well, I agree with you. And in the 100-day speech that he made, he didn't mention the word Palestinian once. And it's just absolutely appalling. And I'm an advocacy journalist, so I don't mind betraying my biases. I think it's great that he's being called Genocide Joe. And
Exactly.
and it reminds me, I mean, I was young, I was still a child, but in the late 60s, when they were protesting the Vietnam War, they would say, hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? And I tweeted recently that's, he did a wonderful thing with the Great Society and the civil rights and all that, but he'll always be remembered, LBJ, for the Vietnam War. And I think similarly with Biden, he can talk about the Inflation Reduction Act till the cows come home, but I don't think he's ever going to lose that moniker, Genocide Joe. But let
100.
me get back to what was happening at Columbia. So I remember following an account, and I know you can't really speak to this person specifically, so I'll do the speaking about him. But he's a professor in the business department, business school, and his name is Shai Davidai. And he's been tweeting nonstop, probably as long as you have, but from a completely different perspective. I mean, I had to mute him maybe about a month ago because he kept coming up on my feed, even though I didn't even follow him. And I just couldn't stand to see the horrible things that he was saying. And I just decided to check in right before we went on the air here. And sure enough, 3 hours ago, his main post is right now at Columbia, an unauthorized pro-Hamas protest. So that's how he phrases them. By refusing to hold the organizers accountable, Columbia is sending a big fuck you to every Jewish and Israeli student, faculty, or staff. The president of Columbia needs to be held accountable. And then it's this really long thread. Everything is so egregious, I don't know where to begin. So let's start with this. Here is one of the main organizers riling up the crowd by telling them there's nothing more honorable than dying for a noble cause. Where have I heard that one before? So he's twisting that.
Yeah.
That's a pretty generic statement that nobody would be opposed to if one is a resistor. Then he says, here's another organizer leading a chant in Arabic that says, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be Arab. Now, I don't speak Arabic, but I will bet you it is not saying that at all. And I want to talk about that chant. And then he says, here's a third one calling for an armed resistance because they're calling for a global intifada. And then he says, remember during the 5 years of the second intifada in Europe, in Israel, there were 144 suicide bombs. Almost 700 Israeli civilians were murdered. How is it okay to call for killing civilians in the U.S.? Anyway, he goes on and on and on. I don't want to give any more airtime to his. But can you tell people who have heard that phrase, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, what that really means? Because they're saying that it means genocide of the Jews.
Yeah, so from the river to the sea, first, the way that people are interpreting it as genocide for the Jews is completely, I would say that, I mean, it's wrong. Like, assume, and also too, it's like assuming that freedom and humanitarian rights for Palestinians, automatically assuming that Jewish people will be killed. I mean, there are Palestinian people who are Jewish. So it's like, that's very ignorant. And then it's also too, it's like the phrase from the river to the sea. It's like, that has literally been used by the Israeli government in their Likud charter. And it's like this, it's almost like an obsession with like certain words and certain phrases that people like, oh, this phrase hurts my feelings, or this is upsetting. And it's like, I get it. Sometimes when seeing things that you disagree with, or seeing things that don't correspond with your political views, it can be upsetting, especially if those views are something that you hold very deeply. But it's like, we also have to look at why people are protesting. I mean, like, I'm protesting at Columbia, like, to honor the loss of my family members and to stand up for the humanitarian rights of Palestinians. That's what many other Palestinian students are doing. Many of us are grieving. Many of us have lost family. And so to just characterize students as, oh, like, we're all pro-terror, oh, we support the killing of civilians. It's like, none of us have ever said that. Like, I'm a pretty peaceful person. I'm a social worker. not a social worker, social work student. So it's like, to just assume that we all want violence, it's harmful. And it's also too, it's like, there has been real violence directed towards Arab, Muslim, and especially Palestinian students right now. And it's like, I mean, just at Columbia, what happened to us? I mean, we were sprayed with chemical weapons. The 3 Palestinian students in Vermont who were shot for wearing keffiyehs. It's like, this is real violence that is happening towards Palestinians, but it's like, it doesn't get the same airtime or acknowledgement as people's concern about chants. I
Yeah.
mean, I was really sprayed with chemical weapons. Like my skin and my hair, that's why I'm wearing this mask. Like my skin and my hair, my face, they're still burning. And it's like, we don't get congressional hearings. We don't get Joe Biden denouncing these events. And it's like, that is also too, it's like, that is the whole point of a college campus, to come and learn about ideas that you aren't necessarily comfortable with, or to be exposed to new ways of thinking. I think
Yeah.
shutting speech just because you were uncomfortable with it, I think that sets a really dangerous precedent.
Yeah, you were even having teach-ins. They weren't even necessarily protests. They were teach-ins that were being protested.
Yeah, we had that were being protested, even a vigil. I was like, we can't even honor the lives of our dead family members without protesting, like without somebody like protesting and objecting to it. And it's just like, it's ridiculous. It feels like there's not really a space for like Palestinians or the Palestinian experience. It's like they want to just shut us down and silence us.
Yeah.
And silencing people, that's not going to work. If you've ever met a Palestinian, you know that we are pretty persistent people.
Mm.
And silencing us isn't going to work. Bullying us isn't going to work. Intimidating us isn't going to work. And I think people need to, instead of just assuming that, just assuming things about us, I think that they need to get us to know us and see us as people and see us as human beings, before just assuming that, we're pro-terror or something along those lines. It's just,
Yeah.
it's
It's twisting the truth. I mean, you take the Intifada. The first Intifada was by and large peaceful. And yes,
Mhm.
in the second Intifada, there was suicide bombing, but the word just means shaking off.
Exactly.
So when you're calling for that, it's very similar to the river to the sea. Palestine will be free, and like you said in Likud charter, it says from the river to the sea, Israel will be for Jews. So if any of
Mhm.
them is saying which one is going to be the ethno state, it's Likud charter. You're just saying you want to be free in your own land, and
Exactly.
so when you hear American Jews, and I'm sure people have come up to you. I saw an exchange where you were inside a room and there was a young Jewish girl student outside trying to talk to you, and it was a very reasonable exchange. And she was talking about feeling unsafe. I mean, to me, when I hear that, and I've heard you say about how you've been sprayed, and we also know about every incident of Islamophobia is up 167%. And by the way, just for viewers who follow the Anti-Defamation League, that used to be a good organization that really did track anti-Semitism. But
Mhm.
since October 7th, they're now counting every Free Palestine protest as an anti-Semitic incident. So that's how they're able to say anti-Semitic incidents are up 300%. I would venture to say that it's probably the Islamophobia and the anti-Semitism has probably risen at a parallel rate. But without them keeping accurate statistics, how can we really know? So when they say, I mean, wouldn't it be better if they just said uncomfortable, like you were saying, some of these things you can understand how they might feel uncomfortable. To say unsafe is such a slap in the face when people are literally losing their lives, losing their limbs, starving to death, losing their homes, etc.
I think the term uncomfortable would be better. And instead of unsafe, that implies that there is like a direct threat to you, or to other individuals. And I don't think that students speaking up about Palestine Palestine is inherently threatening. And it's also too, it's like the way that people saying, oh, like, I feel unsafe. I mean, like, I also, like, I feel unsafe as well, but it's like Palestinian students, Arab students, Muslim students, we're not getting the same type of press. We're not getting the same type of news attention that students who oppose us are, and that's been frustrating too. It's like we are experiencing like direct threats to our safety and our well-being. I mean, I have gotten hundreds of death threats in the past few months, just for being Palestinian and speaking up about my family. I have gotten people telling me all kinds of atrocious stuff. Somebody told me that I should be chopped up into little pieces, just all kinds of awful stuff that I would never ever say to another human being. And it's like, I really think people or also too, the other issue is too, is like people are often in echo chambers, especially like with social media. It's like they tend to see kind of like the same content over and over that reinforces their views over and over, and it's like they're exposed to something different and they don't know what to do. That's something that I've noticed.
Well, when you started having these protests, and there were counter protests, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, the university decided they were going to ban Students for Justice in Palestine and Jewish Voice for Peace. They
Mm-hmm.
didn't ban the pro-Israel organization. They just banned the pro-Palestinian. Can you talk a little bit about that and the reaction of the two groups, and then what you did, how you sort of tried to reconstitute under another name?
Yeah, so Columbia University decided to suspend two student groups, Students for Justice in Palestine and Jewish Voices for Peace. They claimed that these groups were using threatening rhetoric and that they were being intimidating. But then when we asked administration about it, they said that, oh, that's not actually the case. And administration also claimed that these organizations were violating certain university event policies, but these policies were implemented without giving students or these student orgs any type of notice whatsoever, saying that you need, before you plan a protest, before you plan any kind of event on campus, we need a 10 days notice. And the reality is, with the amount of death and destruction that is happening right now in Gaza, people don't have time to book a protest 10 days in advance with university administration. And that's why the university decided to suspend those two organizations. They were like, you aren't following the rules, even though those rules were specifically made to suppress speech on campus. And part of why I think these organizations are suppressed on campus is because donors really do not like seeing the protests. Donors are very upset at a number of Ivy Leagues, not just Columbia. I know this happened at Harvard, at Penn, MIT, but donors are really upset seeing the protests on campus. And so the university thought that by suspending these student organizations, that would curtail the protesting, that would get things to quiet down. But that's not really the case. I would say, if anything, that actually made students more determined to organize, more determined to fight for the liberation of Palestinians. So what happened is, those student organizations, SJP and JVP, they formed a coalition. And so the coalition is called Columbia University Apartheid Divest. And so what that means is, a coalition is a group of student organizations working together for a shared purpose. And so now it's not just one student org or two student orgs fighting for Palestinian liberation, it's over 100 student orgs, which is
Wow.
incredible. It's amazing. And the reason why we're fighting for divestment is because Columbia University, it directly invests in companies and in products that harm the Palestinian people and that contribute to death and destruction in Gaza. So Columbia University has one of the biggest endowments in the country. It is a $12 billion endowment. So to put that in perspective, that is a bigger GDP than many countries. It's massive, $12 billion. And so in the past, students have played a significant role in influencing how this endowment is spent, where this money goes, where this money goes to, etc. So, like, for example, I believe it was 2015, Columbia University was one of the first schools in the country to divest from private prisons. So what that means is that money in the in Columbia's endowment would no longer be going towards private prison companies. And so once Columbia started doing that, other universities started following. So Columbia has a reputation for protesting. It's known as the activist ivy. So it's like, and in the past, administration has tried to stifle or curtail protests before, and it's never gone well. I mean, they tried doing this with the Vietnam War, and you can look at the protest in 1968, where students literally occupied a building and took a dean hostage. Not saying any of our protests are like that now. They're a lot more peaceful. Hopefully it doesn't get to that point. But it's like students have long played a role and helped shape how this endowment is being used, because this endowment is being funded by our tuition dollars. And so Columbia's endowment, for example, right now is invested in companies such as Lockheed Martin and Elbit Systems. And these are, like, for example, defense contractors, weapons manufacturers. These all contribute to the death and destruction of people in Palestine and also in countries across the world. And we're saying, no, we want our tuition, we want our money to be spent on something better. And that's why we're pushing so hard for divestment. I know that what we are doing, it's what was it? It's a drop in the bucket. Like, there is need for activism on all sides and from all backgrounds and all perspectives for the Palestinian cause. But changing how you spend your money and changing where your money is spent can really have a significant influence on policy.
Absolutely.
And yeah, like, we can look at, like, the apartheid South Africa. Part of what brought the fall of apartheid South Africa was the boycotts. They were extremely successful.
Yes. Now, so since you now have 100 groups in this coalition, I imagine that the attendance at these protests is larger. Is it getting larger as this? I don't even want to call it a war. I mean, I call it a genocide because that's what it is. But as it's continuing on, into the fourth month now, are the protests getting larger? And what about the counter protests?
So the protests have only gotten larger, which is really impressive. I mean, even at the protest on Friday where we were skunked, I mean, people were standing outside for hours in the snow and in the cold. Like, people really, really believe in this cause, and they believe in the Palestinian people. And it gives me hope. Like, as somebody who's Palestinian American, I have never seen this much support for Palestine in my life. My Baba, who is in his 50s, he's never seen this much support for Palestine in his life. So even though we are experiencing a lot of depression, a lot of bullying, a lot of intimidation, I really do have hope that things will be better and that a better world is possible. And I also think, too, it's empowering people to speak up for what is right. Like, people speaking up for Palestine, I've also seen them be more motivated to speak up for genocides that are going on in other countries, like what's going on in Sudan or what's going on in Congo. All of our oppression is linked. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge the systems that are causing the oppression that people experience. And by going to these protests, by going to these teach-ins, by educating, by people taking the time and effort to educate themselves, they're getting an incredible political education. And also, they're empowered to use their voice and speak up for what is right.
And what about the counter protests? Are they dying down? Are they staying the same, or are they growing as well?
It's about the same 30 people or so that continue to counter protest. There's, like, a very small but dedicated group that shows up to pretty much all of our events and tries to, like, harass people or intimidate people. What's been especially bizarre is at Columbia is, like, there are more grown adults, like, trying to go after students and dox students and get students in trouble. Like, when I was at the protest on Friday, there were people from the community, and I found out they were later Columbia alums, but they were, like, men in their in their 60s and 70s, like making fun of college students, making fun of grad students, like trying to film people and catch people at bad times. And I was just like, this is just inappropriate. Like, it's really, unfortunately, it has emboldened some people to, I would say it's emboldened some people to be more hateful and more malicious towards other people. But at the same time, I've been really inspired by the community that we have and on campus, and how I've been able to meet other Palestinian students at Columbia, have been able to meet other organizers at Columbia. That part's been pretty incredible.
Yeah. So tell me what happened on Friday. That was a Jews for Ceasefire protest. Wasn't
Yeah,
even Palestinian organized one. It was a Jews for Ceasefire, which, I'm
it was,
very enthusiastic about. Tell
yeah.
us what happened, what you observed, what you found out through your excellent detective work.
Thank you. It was like, the government needs to put me on their payroll at some point. I was like, we managed to find out about Stuart Seldowitz, and we found out about these guys. It's like, government should put me on their payroll. But yeah, it was this protest. There were several groups there. So there were Students for Justice for Palestine, there was Jewish Voices for Peace, and there was also Jews for Ceasefire. And so I was at this protest, and I noticed these two individuals who later ended up using chemical weapons on us. I noticed them being very aggressive and very hostile towards protest attendees. And they were wearing these like fake keffiyehs. And I was like, this is odd. So I took pictures of them because I was like, I don't want to forget who they are. But just some of the stuff that they were saying to people was really awful. And they were especially aggressive towards towards the students who were holding up the Jews for Ceasefire banner. They were going up to them. They were calling them self-hating Jews. They were calling them traitors. These students were referring to Arab, Muslim, and Palestinian students. I mean, they called me a terrorist, all kinds of stuff. And they kept on filming us, and it seemed as if they wanted to provoke a reaction or agitate us. I was really calm towards them and not upset them. It looked like they were trying to get some type of reaction out of me. And at the protest, when I was there, I remember just smelling this smell in the air, and it was just atrocious. I was like, oh my gosh, like it smells like somebody died. Like, what is this smell? And then at first I was like, okay, maybe I stepped in some dog poop. Like, maybe I'm just tired. I tried to like kind of ignore it for a little bit. But then after the protest, when the protest was done, I just noticed how bad I felt. I felt so sick. I felt fatigued. I was nauseous. I had a really bad headache. And I was like, something is going on here. I'm not sure what, but something is going on here. And then I was getting texts and calls from my friends, and they were like, did you smell that smell? Or my friend was like, oh my gosh, I threw up like 3 times. Like, I don't know what is wrong with me. And so we figured out, it was a group of students, we figured this out, but we thought it was initially maybe a stink bomb or maybe pepper spray at first. But these two individuals, they ended up using skunk on us. And so skunk is considered a chemical weapon. It sticks
How
to
did
your,
you definitively identify that that's what it was, or are you just supposing that's what it was?
it's most likely skunk. So the reason why we say that is because so skunk is regularly used on Palestinians in the West Bank. And so this matched the smell. It also matched the effects of how it sticks to your hair and your skin and your clothing. So when this is used on Palestinians in the West Bank, like for example, it's been used on peaceful protesters there. It's been used on shopkeepers and merchants. So like if a merchant gets their produce sprayed with skunk, they have to throw it all out just because of how bad it stinks. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, this reminds me of that," because the smell was everywhere. It was getting on my hair, it was getting on my skin, it was getting on my clothes. To this day, like I think I'm on shower number 14, and like this stuff is still in my hair. And it's the only way you can get rid of it is a special soap that is only sold to law enforcement. And the way that this product too is like, this is not something that is sold to the general public. you have to have a military background or a law enforcement background in order to purchase this.
And so you identified one of the perpetrators as being with the Israeli Defense Forces, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's how he would have had access to that.
Yes. And then we also found that the other perpetrator was also involved in the Israeli Defense Forces as well.
And how did you ID them? You took their pictures, and then how did you match their pictures with their real identities?
So social media, their LinkedIn, so they indicated their military service on their LinkedIn, social media, and reverse image search as well. One of these individuals, they were pretty public. They did an interview with CBS News, and so it was pretty easy to put two and two together. It was also many individuals at the protest had personal interactions with these individuals. I did myself. So that was how we were able to figure it out. And then also too, it was the way that the smell was deployed. For example, like it wasn't the way they did it. It was very quick. It was someone who would have to be trained to do this. And then also too is like the conditions and the stuff as well. So during the day of the protest, it was snowing. So it was harder to determine that this had happened to us because of the weather conditions. So it's like the fact that they did this so quickly, that it was premeditated, that they had access to these chemicals, and that they had served in the IDF, both of them, that they had indicated that. I was like, yeah, this was actually absolutely done on purpose in order to intimidate people, in order to scare people. And the reaction from Colombia was very disappointing. It wasn't until Monday night that Colombia acknowledged that this happened to us.
And didn't they blame you? Didn't they? Instead, they blamed the unauthorized protest aspect of it.
Yeah, they were like, oh, you guys shouldn't have been protesting. Then maybe you wouldn't get sprayed with chemical. And it's like, that doesn't matter. Even if a protest is not authorized, and the whole point of a protest is to be disruptive, nobody deserves to be sprayed with skunk. I mean, I wouldn't wish this stuff on my worst enemy. It is horrible.
The Intercept did do an article.
Yes.
And after the Intercept did their article, they were sort of forced to investigate it, correct?
Yeah.
Then they banned the people, or they didn't ban the people?
They claim to have banned the people, but then my friends were seeing the individuals still on campus. And I'm like, that's interesting. And it's like, we've really been left in the dark with how to deal with this. I mean, like the university, because they didn't acknowledge what happened to us, students didn't know how much harm this chemical had caused and how to deal with it, how to treat with it. I mean, I was sitting there looking up on Reddit, like how to deal with chemical warfare, how to get rid of toxic chemicals. And it's like, it was so surreal the way that it happened too. It's like, when it happened, it's like, this is the first week of the semester. I haven't even bought all my textbooks for my classes yet. So like to be thrown into this was absolutely crazy. And it felt like for a while, like the university like didn't believe us. Like I told them about it, and it's like my concerns weren't really being taken seriously. And it wasn't until students started posting photos of themselves being hospitalized and tagging the university, being like, at Columbia, like we're like they started taking it seriously. And it's ridiculous. It's like you shouldn't have to beg the university to do the bare minimum and keep their students safe, especially when Columbia they make a really big deal about like, oh, we need to protect all students. We need to protect students of different backgrounds. We really need to protect our Jewish students, which is completely understandable. But then it's like they have been totally silent that many of the people who were sprayed with this chemical weapon are Jewish.
Yeah. And it's like the university, they can't win with anyone, because here's Shai Davidai saying, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be Arab. According to this person, my 93-year-old Jewish grandmother and 4-year-old Jewish niece does not have a right to exist in Israel. I mean, everybody is just, it's so frustrating. Like, how are we ever going to get it together? Like, if we can't even have peace on our campuses, how are we going to have peace in Israel, Palestine? But I want to end with that question. I want to end the show with that question, but I first have a couple more questions to ask you. You also had a video go viral. And because of your video, it must have been seen by how many millions of people saw that Stuart Selowitz?
It got it had 45 million views on Twitter, which is
yeah.
wild.
I mean, for the people who don't know, this is a man who it turned out to be, he worked in the Obama administration. And you could tell more about what he did, but he was harassing. He went back multiple times. I think it was at least 3 times to harass this halal cart guy. And saying horrible things like 4,000 Palestinian dead children were not enough. Talk about that story. And then the upshot, because he was finally sentenced, and people are not going to believe after these things that you're going to hear that he said what his sentence was.
This was, so my, when I saw the video, I was in complete shock. So my friend, I went to the deli that day, and I was just like going to go get myself a little bagel. I was like, okay. And then I was at the deli, and my friend shows me this video, and he was like, you are not going to believe this. And I watched it, and it was the individual in question, Stuart Selowitz, just absolutely berating and harassing this poor halal cart vendor.
To his credit, did not engage.
Yeah, he was trying to shut it down. He was like, don't talk to me, like just trying to just do his job. And I had eaten at this halal cart before. I was like, they've always been friendly to me and nice to me. I was like, nobody deserves to be treated this way. So what I did is I had to go back home to North Carolina for Thanksgiving. And so before I got on my flight, I was like, let me tweet this video. Let me just see if we can figure out who this is, because Mohammed, the vendor that was being harassed by Stuart Selowitz, he had reported this to NYPD multiple times and nothing had happened. And Stuart was just saying all this awful stuff to Mohammed. He was saying, he told Mohammed, he was like, do you like to rape your daughter like Mohammed did? He was asking Mohammed if he supported Hamas. He threatened to have Mohammed investigated by Egyptian intelligence, just all kinds of just awful stuff. And he did it multiple times. And I really don't like bullies. For whatever reason, I've always been like a target for bullies and stuff. And I was just like, I don't like it when other people are bullied. That's not okay. That's not acceptable. Mohammed is just sitting there just trying to do his job. And so I tweeted the video, and I was just like, I don't know what's going to happen. Like, let me just tweet this. And so I get on my flight back to North Carolina. And then I get off my flight, and I'm like, oh my gosh. In like an hour and a half later, it has 500,000 views. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, what did I just do? Like, this is unreal. And it turns out that Stuart, he had an individual of harassing other people before. He's harassed Russian diplomats. He's just not a very nice person. And so people on Twitter were able to identify him. And it really was, I would say it was kind of pivotal for New York City, because it brought Islamophobia into question and anti-Arab bias into question. There's been a lot of talk recently about anti-Semitism, but often anti-Arab statements and Islamophobia, they go unnoticed or they go unrecognized. And it was like, this is such a clear example that you can't ignore it.
Yeah, there was one video of somebody was talking to a cop, and they said, oh, this is New York. What can you do?
Yeah.
When they were told about this harassment, oh, this is just New York. I couldn't believe that answer. Yeah. So go on.
I was like, this shouldn't be acceptable to people. And I was happy to see that Stuart, they identified that it was Stuart. And the fact that Stuart, like, I mean, he had a position in the State Department. He was working on Israel and under, I believe it was the Clinton administration. Correct me if I'm wrong. He worked for the Obama administration. It's like, this is somebody who is very well educated and was still saying these racist, awful, hateful things. And the fact too is that he didn't just do this one time. He engaged in harassing Mohammed over 3 times. And so that day, Stuart Seldowitz, he ended up spending his Thanksgiving. He got arrested on hate crime charges because the video just went viral. I think people really just could not believe that somebody would talk to someone else this way. And unfortunately, a lot of the charges were dropped. So believe this. I mean, I'm not surprised, but at the same time, it is disappointing. So Stuart Seldowitz, the only punishment that he got, even though he repeatedly harassed this person, was a anti-bias course.
Yeah.
That is not enough. He was going up and repeatedly harassing someone. I was like, that is not enough to address his bigotry. I mean, I've seen people get more severe punishments, like for shoplifting or committing some other minor crime. And I think too, it really speaks about like our justice system and who has access to lawyers and who is heard by justices and judges.
Yeah. I wonder if he had any friends in high places because of his government service.
That's my guess. I would not be surprised.
Yeah. So now we're going to have to close out now, but I wanted to ask you, in the 3.5 months since this has been going on, do you think any minds are being changed? I mean, let's just talk about this country. I mean, we're all watching what's going on around the world. We see what's happening with South Africa bringing the case, and I thought it was a very eloquently presented case. I watched the whole South African argument. I couldn't get a third of the way through Israel because it was such bald-faced lies.
Yeah.
But, you know, we see the 50-state abandon Biden movement. I watched their press conference, and they're deciding that they don't care if Trump had the Muslim ban. They don't care if Trump is going to be just as bad on this issue. They just cannot let Biden get away with this. And they're just bound and determined to make him a one-term president. We see, 70% of the students or young people supporting a ceasefire. I mean, the majority of people in this country support a ceasefire. Huge percentage of Democrats, huge percentage of young people. And the world, the global, if you look, it's just the US and a couple of little countries in Europe. Not even Europe is united in supporting Israel. So, over this past time, it's been so horrible. But is there anything in it that gives you hope?
I think seeing the sustained protests and seeing people who have never contacted their government officials or their elected officials showing up for Palestine and asking their representatives for a ceasefire. I mean, the amount of political engagement that I'm seeing from people is pretty unprecedented, even from people who typically shy away from politics. They're like, you know what? I can't ignore this. And I think that's really important. And I also think too, it's like people are frustrated with how our government is operating right now. They're like, I'm struggling to afford rent. I'm dealing with massive medical bills. Inflation is through the roof. And yet we're spending more money to go bomb children in Gaza. They're like, I don't want my tax dollars going towards this. And it's like, I think it's also causing too, to like people to realize their power and how much power that we have. As voters and as individuals in the US, we have power. And a lot of us don't realize that, or we take our power for granted. And I think like even just one person just speaking up and just making a difference, you never know who you're going to impact. You never know whose life you're going to change. And I really do think it's important for people to be engaged, get to know your elected officials, get involved in local politics, especially. I've been, even though politics has been frustrating, especially at the federal level, and seeing how Joe Biden has been handling this, I've been really inspired by people who are running for office now because of this. They're like, you know what? I don't like the representation that I'm seeing, so I'm going to go and change it. And I think that's really inspiring. I really do think that a better world is possible, but it's something that we all have to collectively work towards.
Right. Now, how's your family, the rest of your family that's in the West Bank, and also you personally? Has this changed the trajectory of your future, your involvement in this?
It has. I would say my family, like a lot of it, it's just kind of terrifying. Like in Gaza, it's like we still don't even know the full death toll yet because it's like bodies are being trapped under the rubble. And then it's like my family in the West Bank. So there's been a dramatic increase in settler violence, in unexpected raids, in suppression and surveillance of Palestinians. And it's like they are terrified. But it's also, too, it's like they're terrified, but they are very inspired by everybody who is speaking up about Palestine. And like they haven't seen this type of support before in their lives, a lot of them. And so that does give them hope. But I really think things are, honestly, it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. But I really do believe that things will be better for Palestinians. I really do.
And yourself, are you still going to pursue your social work career, or are you thinking about other things now? Has it affected the future trajectory of your life?
It's definitely, I would say, it's made me, in terms of jobs, organizations, like where I want to work, it's made me reevaluate where I want to work. I still want to do social work and I still want to help other people. But frankly, I've seen a lot of silence from orgs that claim to stand for social justice or nonprofits because they don't want to upset their funders. They don't want to upset their donors. And I'm just like, if you can't speak up that this is wrong in a profession that claims to stand for social justice, in a profession that claims to work for marginalized people, then that's an organization that I don't really want to be working at. It's definitely made me more aware of my values. And I would say also too is like the people that I spend time with and the company that I'm around. I've lost some friends because some of my friends, they've said in the past, they've said like inflammatory things about my family, or they haven't spoken up or done anything really. And I was just like, that's not a true friend. Like if you can't be there for me when I really need it, then it's like that's not really somebody that I want to have in my life. But at the same time, it's also like it's brought me closer to a lot of people. I've met a lot of really wonderful people through organizing for Palestine, through standing up for Palestine. And so that part's been pretty cool.
Yeah, I will agree with you. And I think Einstein said it. He didn't say it this succinctly, but he said something to the effect that silence is complicity. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel that we're so helpless and paralyzed and powerless to do anything really to stop what Israel is doing. All we have is our voices, and we have to keep using them to speak out. And I can relate to what you're saying about organizations you want to work with. I'm seriously contemplating leaving the North Carolina Medicare for All coalition because they wouldn't consent on a ceasefire, doing a statement for a ceasefire. And a lot of health organizations, the nurses union, health justice in California, are putting out statements for ceasefires because it so relates to medical care, not just all the hospitals and doctors and medics that are being killed and bombed in Gaza, but also the money that isn't going to medical care for our people in this country because it's going to bomb other people. And it was really interesting. People were saying things like, how effective can a resolution be? Well, these are the same people that want us to go around to city councils and get resolutions for Medicare for all.
Yeah.
So obviously they think resolutions are educational and they build support, or else they would say, it's not going to be effective or it's not in our mission,
Yeah.
Whereas we sign on solidarity statements to other organizations all the time. That isn't our primary mission. So it's so funny to see the excuses people make. And and so I'm really contemplating, like, do I want to make that stand? Can I work with those people? I mean, the only thing heartening was it ended up being 16 that we should make the statement and 8 that we shouldn't. But they'd make decisions by consensus, so it wasn't a majority situation. So the thing went south. But anyway, well, listen, Leila, I really want to thank you for your time tonight, and I'm honored to be the first show that you've appeared, because I know you've had a lot of other invitations, but I think over the months, we've built up trust with each other, and that's super important.
It is. I really appreciate you for reaching out to me and just giving the opportunity for me to talk about this. It really does mean a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, and keep fighting.
Of course.
All right, take care. Bye, everyone. Please share this show.